Imagine standing on the eastern bank of a river, just staring across the water at a landscape you have literally been promised your entire life.
Yeah, a land you've only ever heard stories about.
Right. But the only man who actually knows how to get you there, the leader who has carried your people through 4 decades of starvation and warfare, he just told you he's going to die right there in the dirt.
Oh man, I mean, think about the panic.
Exactly. And you are going to have to cross that river entirely on your own.
It is an absolute geopolitical and, well, emotional powder keg. There's really no other way to describe it.
It really is, and that is the exact tension where the book of Deuteronomy opens. So, welcome to a brand new deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Today, our mission is to unpack an incredibly detailed, rigorous academic survey on this ancient text. We are exploring why Deuteronomy is considered the theological and literary linchpin of the entire Old Testament.
Yeah, it's the bridge.
It is. It bridges the foundational stories of Genesis and Exodus straight into the future of the biblical canon. And just to set the table for you, we are working with a very comprehensive survey text today.
Right, a curriculum written specifically from a conservative evangelical perspective.
Exactly. It's designed to train first-year MDiv students and serious church leaders. So we are going to be doing some deep linguistic dives into the original Hebrew text.
Utilizing the Biblia Hebraica Stricartensia, or the BHS, for those studying the original languages.
Right, the standard Hebrew Bible. And we'll be looking at extensive excerpts from the text because, really, I always compare Deuteronomy to, well, the ultimate season finale and a previously on segment combined into one.
That is actually a great analogy.
It's this urgent, incredibly high-stakes farewell address delivered right on the very edge of the Promised Land.
And to really grasp that urgency, we have to look at the Sitz-in-Leben.
Let's unpack that term for a second.
Sure. So, Sitz-in-Leben is a German term used in biblical scholarship that just means the setting in life. It's the socio-historical context.
Where are they? What's happening?
Exactly. And Israel is camped on the plains of Moab. They have survived 40 years of wilderness wandering. But the crucial detail here is that the previous generation, the ones who saw the Red Sea part, the ones who saw the plagues, they're all dead.
Right. Their bones are literally buried in the desert behind them.
Yeah, because of that massive failure of faith at Kadesh Barnea. So Moses is not speaking to those seasoned veterans.
He's talking to their kids.
He's standing in front of a brand new generation. And this new generation is staring down a terrifying paradigm shift.
Because they've only known the wilderness.
Right. They're transitioning from this nomadic, survivalist reality where they literally live day to day on miraculous manna falling from the sky.
Yeah.
And now they're about to become a settled agricultural society.
Which means dealing with fortified Canaanite city-states.
Fortified city-states, the massive cultural allure of pagan fertility cults, and something our source heavily emphasizes, they're about to face the insidious, slow-acting poison of unearned prosperity.
Wow, unearned prosperity. That is such a huge shift. If you think about it, the shift from survival to prosperity requires a completely different operational framework.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's the difference between trauma triage in an emergency room, and long-term preventative care. In the wilderness at Sinai, it was pure triage.
Just survive the day.
Right. Don't touch the mountain. Keep the camp ceremonially clean. Just stay alive.
Yeah.
But now they're looking at building houses they didn't labor for. They're going to harvest vineyards they didn't plant.
Yeah, the rules of the game are completely changing.
So the law has to evolve to handle the complexities of a thriving local economy and, honestly, the sheer temptation to just assimilate into the surrounding culture. So Moses steps up and delivers this passionate farewell address.
It really is passionate. But I think that tone is so often lost when we just look at the title of the book in English.
Deuteronomy. It sounds like a clinical textbook.
It really does. I mean, the English name actually comes from a Greek mistranslation in the Septuagint. The Greek word is Deuteronomian, which literally translates as second law.
Which is terribly misleading.
It is, because it makes it sound like this is a completely brand new set of rules that Yahweh somehow just, forgot to mention 40 years earlier at Sinai.
Right, like, oh, by the way, here's volume 2.
Exactly, and our source material goes to great lengths to correct that. The Hebrew text itself never calls it a second law. In the Hebrew Bible, the book is named after its opening phrase, Ele Hadvarim.
Meaning, these are the words.
Yes, these are the words. And when the text does refer to itself later on, it uses the phrase Mishneh HaTorah.
Mishneh HaTorah, which means a copy, right?
A copy or a repetition of the law.
Hey.
But it's not just a rote recitation where Moses is just reading a scroll. He is preaching. This is a masterclass in sermonic exhortation.
He's applying it.
Right, he's taking the Sinai covenant and vigorously applying it to a new generation facing a totally new reality.
So we have this incredible context. The timeline covers roughly 2 months, which includes a 30-day period of mourning for Moses, placed around 1406 BC if we're looking at an early date timeline.
Or around 1220 BC on a late date timeline.
Right. But if we're really going to understand this from an MDiv level perspective, we cannot avoid the massive debate surrounding the book's origins.
Oh, it is the battleground.
It is. To understand the weight of this book, we have to look at how our conservative source defends the text against the prevailing critical consensus regarding authorship.
Yeah, the authorship debate here is arguably the most fiercely contested issue in Old Testament higher criticism.
So let's dive into that.
Well, since the 19th century, especially with the rise of Julius Wellhausen and what's known as the documentary hypothesis.
Right, the idea that the Pentateuch was stitched together from different sources, J, E, D, and P.
Exactly. Secular and mainline critical scholarship has overwhelmingly argued that Moses absolutely did not write Deuteronomy. They view the D source as entirely separate.
And they usually date it centuries later, right? Specifically to the 7th century BC, during the reign of King Josiah in Jerusalem.
Yes. The entire critical argument basically hinges on this one narrative in 2 Kings chapter 22. During King Josiah's reign, the high priest Hilkiah claims to have suddenly found the book of the law in the temple during renovations.
Just stumbled upon it.
Right. And this discovery sparks a massive, sweeping religious reform. Josiah centralizes all worship in Jerusalem. He tears down the rural altars, destroys the pagan high places.
All the things Deuteronomy commands.
Exactly. So critical scholars look at that and argue, well, this book wasn't casually found. It was authored in that exact era by the Jerusalem priesthood.
So the implication there is pretty dark. It means the priests essentially forged the document, right? They put their new centralization laws into the mouth of ancient Moses to give it divine authority.
Yeah, to consolidate their own political and religious power. They view it as a highly motivated political creation.
A pious fraud.
That's the exact term often used, a pious fraud. But our source material, which is designed for conservative evangelical pastoral training, vehemently rejects this late dating theory.
I mean, it has to.
It has to. The text argues that this critical view reduces one of the most profound theological documents in human history to a lie. For a curriculum aiming to build a high view of Scripture, affirming essential Mosaic authorship under divine inspiration is just foundational.
So how does the source defend that? Because it grounds its defense in both internal evidence and canonical reception, correct?
Right. First, it points to the internal claims, the repeated first-person declarations in the Hebrew text. These are the words that Moses spoke. But crucially, it points straight to Jesus in the New Testament.
During the temptation in the wilderness.
Yes. When Jesus is tempted by Satan, he quotes Deuteronomy multiple times, and he directly attributes the authority of the text to Moses.
And the logic there is, if the theological weight of the New Testament relies on the historical reality of Moses actually speaking these words, then dismissing it as a 7th century forgery unravels the entire canonical thread.
Exactly. You end up with a Jesus who is either mistaken or complicit in a theological forgery, which is unacceptable from a conservative standpoint.
But let me push back on that a bit, or at least play devil's advocate for the listener, because anyone reading the text is going to hit a glaring roadblock at the very end of the scroll.
Oh, chapter 34.
Yeah, Deuteronomy 34. If we accept the conservative view that this is Moses' final address, how on earth do we handle the final chapter? It literally describes Moses climbing Mount Nebo, dying, being buried by Yahweh in a secret valley.
And then it evaluates his legacy.
Right. It says, no prophet has risen in Israel like him since. So if the defense of Mosaic authorship is as rigid as it claims, does the source argue Moses wrote a highly detailed past tense account of his own funeral before he actually died?
No. And that is the necessary friction point. But a rigorous conservative scholarship doesn't shy away from it. Our source clarifies that affirming essential Mosaic authorship doesn't demand an overly wooden or, mechanical view of inspiration.
We don't have to pretend editorial realities don't exist.
Exactly. The standard view presented in the curriculum is that the substance, the core speeches, the massive theological architecture of the book that is undeniably Mosaic. However, the final account of his death, and likely some geographical updates, were appended by a later inspired redactor.
Which would naturally be his immediate successor, Joshua.
Joshua is the most logically and historically sound candidate. I mean, he would have overseen the transition of leadership and the initial compilation of the Torah as Israel finally crossed the Jordan.
So adding the obituary of Moses doesn't negate Moses' authorship of the preceding sermons.
Not at all. Any more than a biographer adding a final chapter to an unfinished memoir negates the original author of the memoir. The intellectual and theological origin of the covenant text remains firmly with Moses.
Okay, so with Moses firmly established as the architect of these speeches, we can start to really examine the blueprints of his argument. And this leads to something fascinating about the literary structure of the book.
This is where it gets really brilliant.
Because Moses isn't just standing up and rattling off a dry list of legal stipulations. He is strategically hijacking the dominant political framework of his era.
Yeah, the macro structure of Deuteronomy operates on this brilliant subversive level. But to see it, we first have to look at the broad outline of the three main addresses.
Let's break those down. First, we have chapters 1 through 4, which is essentially Moses looks back.
Right, it's a historical prologue. He's rehearsing God's faithfulness and the tragedy of the previous generation's rebellion.
Then we hit the massive central section, chapters 5 through 26. Moses looks up. This is the heavy exposition of the law, the moral and civil codes for the new society.
And finally, chapters 27 through 33. Moses looks out. This is the formal call for covenant renewal, looking toward the future, outlining the blessings and curses, and culminating in the transition of leadership.
Now, to modern readers, that just looks like a logical progression for a long speech. Past, present, future.
Sure, it makes sense to us. But in the ancient Near East, that specific sequence of sections was instantly recognizable as a highly formalized legal document.
The Hittite suzerain-vassal treaty.
Yes, our source draws heavy attention to this. During the Late Bronze Age, specifically the 2nd millennium BC, which, by the way, aligns perfectly with the conservative early date of the Exodus, the Hittite Empire utilized a very rigid, standardized treaty format.
Whenever they were annexing conquered territories.
Exactly. A suzerain, meaning a great emperor, would draw up this massive contract with a lesser vassal king.
So what are the mechanics of that treaty? How does it map onto the biblical text? Because the parallels are kind of shocking.
They really are. Archaeologists have recovered dozens of these Hittite treaties, and they universally follow a 5-part formula.
Okay, part 1.
First is the preamble, where the great king identifies himself. You know, these are the words of the son, Racillus, the great king.
Yeah.
And Deuteronomy 1.1 through 5 maps to this perfectly.
These are the words Moses spoke to all Israel, declaring the law of Yahweh.
Exactly. Second part is the historical prologue, where the emperor recounts his past relations with the vassal. He usually highlights how benevolent he has been to establish a motive for their loyalty.
Which is exactly what Deuteronomy chapters 1 through 4 do, recounting Yahweh's deliverance of Israel from Egypt.
Yep. Third part, you get the stipulations.
The actual rules.
Right, the taxes, the military alliances, the localized laws. And that mirrors the massive law code we see in Deuteronomy 5 through 26.
Okay, so that's 3. What's the 4th part?
Fourth is the document deposition and public reading. The Hittite treaty had to be physically kept in a temple and read periodically to the public.
And Deuteronomy 31 commands that the law be kept right beside the Ark of the Covenant and read out loud every 7 years.
It's a direct parallel. And finally, the fifth part is the divine witnesses, followed by blessings and curses. Hittite treaties always called upon the gods of the mountains, rivers, and skies to witness the oath.
Which Moses subverts beautifully by calling heaven and earth themselves as witnesses against Israel in chapter 4 and chapter 30, because Yahweh is the only God.
Exactly. And then the suzerain promises military protection if the vassal obeys, and absolute annihilation if they rebel, which directly parallels the intense blessings and curses in Deuteronomy 27 and 28. The structural alignment is just undeniable.
It's undeniable, but it also raises some really tough theological questions. I mean, why would the inspired biblical text appropriate the coercive political mechanics of a tyrannical earthly empire?
It seems backwards, right?
Yeah, it feels like copying pagan homework.
But our source explains that this is actually an act of supreme theological subversion. Yahweh is speaking to people in the vernacular of their own geopolitical reality, but he is turning the entire concept completely inside out.
How so?
Well, think about a Hittite treaty. The human emperor coerces the vassal through fear and military intimidation. The entire motive for obedience is terror.
If you don't pay taxes, I'll burn your city.
Right. But in Deuteronomy, the great king is Yahweh. And the historical prologue isn't about God conquering Israel to exploit them for labor and taxes. It is about God liberating them from slavery in Egypt.
So the motive for the covenant isn't fear of a tyrant, it's profound gratitude to a redeemer.
Exactly. It fundamentally shifts the entire axis of the relationship from coercion to grace.
That is amazing. And there's another massive subversion here regarding who the treaty is actually made with, isn't there? Because in the ancient Near East, these treaties were exclusively elite documents.
Highly elite. The emperor made the treaty only with the vassal king.
The peasants working in the fields never saw the document. They just suffered the military consequences if their king rebelled.
Yes, but Moses democratizes the covenant, and that is one of the most radical sociological elements of the entire text. Moses repeatedly addresses all Israel.
Not just the elders.
Right. He explicitly includes the tribal heads, the elders, but also the women, the children, the foreigners living among them, and even the lowest laborers chopping wood and drawing water.
He brings everyone in.
Every single individual is invited into a direct, unmediated covenant relationship with the King of the universe.
You don't need a human king to stand between you and Yahweh. You are all royal vassals. That is breathtaking.
It really is. And to drive this urgency home to the individual listener, Moses utilizes some masterful Hebrew literary devices. The curriculum really dives into the rhetorical craft here.
Yeah, specifically looking at how the text uses structures like chiasmus. Let's unpack that for our listeners who might not be familiar with Hebrew poetics.
Sure. So chiasmus, or inverted parallelism, is a dominant feature in biblical Hebrew rhetoric. It's a structure where ideas are presented and then mirrored in reverse order. So A, B, C, and then B, A.
It forces the reader's attention directly to the center point.
Exactly. The center is the main idea. And the source highlights chapter 8, where Moses uses a chiastic structure to contrast the danger of forgetting God amidst agrarian prosperity with the necessity of remembering the wilderness.
So the structure physically surrounds the concept of wealth with the theological command to remember the source of that wealth.
He traps the temptation inside the theology.
We also see inclusio used heavily, right? Narrative bookends.
Yeah, the transition of leadership from Moses to Joshua in chapters 1 through 3 is perfectly mirrored at the end of the book in chapters 31 through 34.
Which frames the entire giving of the law within the stark reality of mortal succession. Like, human leaders die, but the covenant word of Yahweh remains.
Right, and the vocabulary itself is relentless. If you read the BHS, the Hebrew text of Deuteronomy is driven by specific, recurring imperative verbs.
Let's talk about those verbs.
The root shamor, to keep, to guard, to carefully observe it, appears constantly. It creates this rhythm of pastoral urgency. But the most vital recurring verb, without a doubt, is shama.
Shama, to hear or to listen.
But in biblical Hebrew, hearing is never just passive auditory reception.
It's not just sound waves hitting your eardrum.
Never. To truly shama is to obey. If you hear a command and do not act on it, in the Hebrew mindset, you haven't actually heard it.
So Moses uses this verb to draw a sharp, agonizing contrast between the active, obedient hearing he is demanding of this new generation and the stubborn, unhearing rebellion of their parents in the desert.
Right. Which brings us perfectly to the core theological demand of the entire book.
Section 3 of our deep dive, internalizing the law. Because if the Hittite structure subverts ancient politics, the actual stipulations of this covenant subvert ancient religion entirely.
Absolutely. Because Yahweh demands something that no human legal system can actually enforce.
He demands internal devotion, total, unfragmented allegiance of the heart.
Let's trace how Moses gets there. At the beginning of the central exposition, in chapter 5, Moses reiterates the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue.
But he prefaces it with a pretty startling theological claim.
He does. He looks at this new crowd and says, "Not with our ancestors did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, with all of us who are alive here today."
Now, factually, biologically, that seems incorrect. Many of the people standing there were not even born when the fire came down on Mount Sinai 40 years ago.
Right. But Moses is engaging in a profound collapsing of time. He's declaring that the covenant is not some historical artifact confined to a specific generation of the past. It is a living, continuous reality.
By saying with us who are alive here today, he essentially forces the new generation to realize they cannot ride on the spiritual coattails of their parents.
No, secondhand faith.
Exactly. They are standing at Sinai right now in the present tense, and they must give a present tense answer.
And that answer is codified in what our source identifies as the absolute epicenter of the book.
Yeah.
And arguably the epicenter of the entire Jewish faith.
The Shema, found in Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength.
In the original Hebrew, that central confession is incredibly dense. Just a few words. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Hear, Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one.
Let's unpack that word, ekad. Why is declaring that God is one so utterly revolutionary for these people at this exact moment in history?
To understand the polemical force of Akkad, we really have to look at the Canaanite culture they are about to enter. The source references ancient Near Eastern literature here, particularly the Ugaritic texts.
Those were the clay tablets discovered in modern-day Syria, right?
Yes, and they detail the complex, localized polytheism of the Canaanite pantheon. You've got El, Baal, Asherah, Amat.
It was an entirely transactional, fragmented religious system.
Completely fragmented. You had different manifestations of Bel for different valleys, a different god for rain, a different god for the harvest, a different one for war. The divine realm was divided, it was chaotic, and it was deeply localized.
So when Moses declares Yahweh, Yahweh is one, he is launching a devastating theological strike against that entire worldview.
A total dismantling of it. He is asserting that Yahweh is undivided, utterly sovereign, and exclusive. There is no Yahweh of the hills and Yahweh of the valleys. He is the supreme Lord of all reality.
And because God is Holy One, he demands a wholly unified, unfragmented response from his people.
Which is why verse 5 immediately commands, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength.
The shift here is staggering, because if you look at those Ugaritic texts you mentioned, the Canaanite gods didn't care if you loved them.
Not at all. They just wanted their grain and their blood sacrifices.
Right. The pagan gods just demanded the external transaction to keep the cosmic machinery running, put the grain on the altar, get the rain. But Yahweh demands the livav.
The Hebrew word for heart.
Which, as the source notes, isn't just about warm, sentimental emotions like we think of in the modern West.
Oh, definitely not. In ancient Hebrew anthropology, the livav is the seat of the will. It's the intellect, the decision-making center of the human being.
It's your control center.
Yeah. So loving Yahweh with all your heart means aligning your entire conscious volition with his covenant. It means your internal allegiance and your external actions are perfectly synchronized.
But I want to push on this shift in tone because it feels like a massive pivot from the earlier books of the Pentateuch. Well, in Exodus, the revelation at Sinai, or Horeb, as Deuteronomy prefers to call it, is terrifying. It's external law enforced by lightning, smoke, and the threat of instant death. Do not touch the mountain or you will be stoned.
Right, it's visceral.
Extremely. But now, on the plains of Moab, Moses pivots to this deeply intimate, internalized language of love and heart-level devotion. How does the curriculum explain that theological evolution?
The source provides a brilliant sociological and pastoral analysis here. It argues that this internalization of the law is the necessary preparation for prosperity.
The preparation for prosperity, how does prosperity change the mechanics of obedience?
Well, think about the environment of Sinai versus the environment of Canaan. In the wilderness, the Israelites were facing immediate existential threats: starvation, dehydration, exposure.
A chaotic, nomadic survival scenario.
Right, and in that scenario, you need rigid external martial law just to keep the camp alive. The external pressure of the desert essentially forces compliance.
You obey the cloud by day and the fire by night, or you literally die in the sand.
Exactly. But this new generation is about to enter an agrarian society. They're going to build permanent homes, harvest massive crops, and experience immense wealth and comfort.
And when your belly is full and your borders are secure, the external pressure of survival just evaporates.
It does. And that, Moses knows, is when the human heart wanders. The most dangerous environment for the soul isn't the barren desert, it is the comfortable vineyard.
Wow. So to survive the lethal comfort of prosperity, the law had to move from the mountain into the mind.
Precisely. If their obedience was only based on the fear of lightning strikes and starvation, the moment they got comfortable, they would seamlessly integrate with the Canaanite fertility cults just to ensure their crops kept growing.
The devotion had to be internalized.
The Shema is the theological anchor meant to hold them fast when prosperity tries to sweep them away.
That is a chilling diagnosis of the human condition. And because Deuteronomy places the ultimate demand on the internal state of the heart, it serves as the canonical bridge to the rest of Scripture.
Which brings us to our fourth section, canonical integration.
Right. Our source demonstrates how this book takes the historical foundation of Genesis and Exodus, synthesizes it, and aims it directly into the books of the prophets and the New Testament like an arrow.
It becomes the theological lens through which the rest of Israel's history will be judged.
It establishes the criteria for success and failure for every king, prophet, and citizen that follows. We see this most starkly in chapters 27 and 28, where Moses outlines the covenant sanctions.
The blessings and the curses.
Yeah, he takes the foundational blessings and curses originally given back in Leviticus 26 and expands them with a terrifying rhetorical intensity.
The Hebrew vocabulary progression here is stark and absolute. Moses outlines the baraka, the sweeping, holistic blessings for covenant obedience, and the kalala, the devastating systemic curses for breaching the treaty.
And if you look at the text, the curses significantly outweigh the blessings in sheer volume and graphic detail.
It's not even close. Moses threatens them with disease, famine, siege warfare, and ultimate exile back to a foreign power. It is a bleak, agonizing read.
It is. And what is most haunting is that Moses clearly knows which path they're going to take.
He really does. He possesses this prophetic realism about the stubbornness of the human heart.
Yes, look at Deuteronomy 29, verse 4. After laying out this beautiful grace-based covenant, after demanding total heart-level love in the Shema, Moses looks at the crowd and says, "But to this day, the Lord has not given you a mind that understands, or eyes that see, or ears that hear."
Man. He is telling them, point blank, that they do not possess the internal spiritual machinery to actually keep the covenant they are swearing to uphold.
That verse exposes the tragic, built-in tension of the Old Covenant.
It really does. The law is holy, the demand for love is entirely just, but the covenant itself cannot produce the obedience it demands. The stone tablets can diagnose the sickness of the heart, but they offer absolutely no cure.
The people will inevitably fail.
It's guaranteed.
So if failure is guaranteed, we have to ask, is Deuteronomy just a divine setup? Is Yahweh handing them a contract he knows they will breach just to punish them later?
No. And this is where the intertextual brilliance of the canon really shines. The inevitable failure of the Old Covenant is designed to point the people toward the ultimate divine fix.
The text actively anticipates a future restoration that goes beyond human capability.
Yes. In Deuteronomy 30, verse 6, Moses delivers a breathtaking promise for the far side of their failure in exile. He prophesies, "The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live."
The circumcision of the heart. The Hebrew phrase is mul lavavka.
This is a seismic theological shift. Moses is declaring that eventually God himself will have to perform the spiritual surgery necessary to grant the people the very heart he is currently demanding.
Human striving will never be enough. It requires a unilateral act of divine grace.
And this single verse in Deuteronomy 30 becomes the headwaters for the new covenant promises that explode later in the prophets.
It's exactly what Jeremiah 31 expands on when God says he will write the law directly on their hearts. And Ezekiel 36, where God promises to remove their heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh.
Deuteronomy is essentially writing the checks that the new covenant will eventually cash.
That's a great way to put it. And this anticipation of future failure, followed by ultimate divine rescue, it culminates poetically in chapter 32.
The Song of Moses, known in Hebrew as Haazinu.
Which operates as a massive canonical bookend with the Song of the Sea in Exodus 15, right?
It does. Think about the symmetry. In Exodus 15, the Israelites sing a song looking backward at Yahweh's deliverance from Pharaoh's army at the sea.
A song of past victory.
Right. But in Deuteronomy 32, Moses forces them to learn a song that looks forward. It outlines the entire future history of the nation, their inevitable rebellion, God's terrifying judgment, and his ultimate sovereign salvation of a remnant.
And our source notes that this poem profoundly influenced later biblical literature.
Oh, massively. You can hear the echoes of Haazinu throughout the Psalms, and especially in the prophet Hosea. It basically became the theological sheet music for all the prophets of Israel.
So tracing that trajectory of failure, judgment, and ultimate divine restoration leads us directly into the heart of the source's curriculum, which brings us to section 5.
The Christological focus.
Yes. For MDiv students and pastors, reading Deuteronomy isn't just an exercise in ancient Near Eastern history. The entire exegetical workflow is designed to move toward fulfillment in Jesus Christ.
Finding that Christological focus, what the text actually calls the central nervous system of the book, is paramount. We have to ask, how do these unkeepable laws and terrifying curses finally resolve?
The source outlines several massive connections, but let's start with the promised seed in Deuteronomy 18. Moses tells the people that Yahweh will raise up a prophet like Moses from among their own brothers.
The Hebrew phrase there is navi kamoni.
A prophet like me.
Now, throughout the rest of the Old Testament, God raises up many prophets, right? Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah. But the text makes it explicitly clear that none of them were truly the navi kamoni.
None of them spoke with Yahweh face to face in the same mediatorial way. None of them inaugurated a new covenant
So the expectation just hangs in the air for over a millennium.
until Jesus of Nazareth.
Yes. The New Testament writers explicitly identify Jesus as the ultimate fulfillment of the Nabi Kamoni. He is the true and better Moses.
Which makes perfect sense of the Sermon on the Mount. When Jesus ascends a mountain in Matthew 5 to deliver the sermon, he is deliberately acting as the new and greater lawgiver, offering the definitive interpretation of the Torah.
He mediates the better eternal covenant.
But Jesus doesn't just fulfill the role of the prophet. He absorbs the consequences of the people's failure. Let's look back at the curses, the kalala, in chapters 27 and 28.
Right.
Historically, when Israel is besieged and dragged off into exile by Babylon centuries later, it is the literal, agonizing fulfillment of the Deuteronomic curses.
The covenant sanctions were enforced, just as promised.
But the source points out an even deeper redemptive fulfillment of those exact curses. It highlights the Apostle Paul's argument in his letter to the Galatians.
This is such a crucial connection.
In Galatians 3.13, Paul directly quotes a specific, horrifying curse from Deuteronomy 21.23, which states that anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse.
Paul writes, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, for it is written, Cursed is everyone who is hung on a pole.
That is the most profound Christological insight in this study.
Think about it. Jesus is the only Israelite who ever perfectly obeyed the Shema. He is the only human being who actually loved Yahweh with all his heart, soul, and strength.
So he alone earned the ultimate covenant blessing.
Yet on the cross, he willingly steps into the place of the covenant breakers. He absorbs the full, undiluted terror of the Deuteronomy 28 curses that his people deserved.
He bears the curse of the broken treaty to secure the eternal blessings of the covenant for a rebellious people.
He achieves the heart circumcision that Moses prophesied.
It is stunning theology, just stunning. But a survey designed for local church leaders can't just leave this in the ivory tower of academic theology. It has to land in the pew.
Always.
So how does the curriculum instruct pastors to apply this 3,400-year-old text to a modern congregation today?
The pastoral application is immensely practical. The source emphasizes equipping church leaders to recognize that the core battles of Deuteronomy are still the exact same core battles of the modern human heart.
Take the Shema, for example.
Yeah.
We may not have localized stone altars to Baal set up in our suburbs.
But the modern human heart is just as fragmented.
Right. The idols have just changed their names. We worship the fertility of the stock market, the security of our careers, the comfort of our entertainment, the power of our political affiliations.
Exactly. Our devotions are totally divided. So teaching modern families to love God with an undivided love of heart, soul, and strength is a direct countercultural strike against those modern idols.
It requires intentional daily discipleship.
Deuteronomy 6 literally commands parents to talk about these laws when they sit in their houses, when they walk along the road, when they lie down, and when they get up.
It envisions a relentless, multi-generational transmission of the faith within the rhythm of ordinary life, not just Sunday morning.
Right. And the source also provides a really powerful pastoral paradigm for counseling believers through suffering. It suggests that understanding the covenant curses can actually reframe how we view hardship.
How so?
Well, while believers in Christ are completely saved from the eternal curse of the law, God still disciplines his children. And the underlying logic of the covenant curses in Deuteronomy was never vindictive destruction.
The ultimate goal of the curses was always restoration.
Yes, they were designed to make the people so uncomfortable in their rebellion that they would finally wake up, remember Yahweh, and cry out for mercy.
So when a pastor is counseling a believer going through a really painful season of discipline, they can frame it as fatherly cheesed God's loyal covenantal love.
God loves his people way too much to let them sleepwalk into spiritual amnesia.
Hardship is often the divine megaphone used to wake a deafened heart.
Exactly.
And I think that leads to a crucial analogy for how to preach this book effectively. If a pastor just stands in the pulpit, opens Deuteronomy, and reads it as a list of moral chores, do this, don't do that, try harder, they are entirely missing the Hittite treaty subversion we discussed earlier.
Yeah, they are preaching like a pagan suzerain demanding taxes.
They are preaching fear instead of grace.
Right. Preaching Deuteronomy correctly means constantly rehearsing the historical prologue. It means reminding the congregation of their own exodus, their deliverance from the absolute bondage of sin through the blood of Christ.
Because when the congregation understands the true magnitude of their rescue, their obedience is no longer fueled by the paralyzing fear of a tyrant. It is fueled by immense, overflowing gratitude to a Savior.
The law becomes a framework for love, not a ladder for salvation.
That is the beautiful pastoral heart of the book. And as we close out the survey, I think it's clear that Deuteronomy is the exact opposite of a dry, ancient legal Tanakh.
It is an urgent, blood-earnest pastoral plea.
It establishes the theological vocabulary of covenant faithfulness, and it constructs the prophetic runway that leads directly to the cross of Jesus Christ.
It really is the lens that focuses the entire biblical narrative.
But our source leaves its students, and by extension, you, the listener, with one final, deeply provocative question. A question that builds right on the tension of the Sitzim Leben we started with.
The transition to the new land.
Right. We established that surviving the howling wilderness was brutal, but Moses recognized that inheriting a land flowing with milk and honey poses an infinitely more lethal threat to the human soul.
The slow, numbing danger of comfort.
So the question you have to mull over is this. How do you remain faithful when blessing and danger stand side by side?
It's a tough question.
It is easy, almost instinctive, to cry out to God when you were starving in the desert, when your bank account is totally empty, or when the medical test comes back positive. But what happens to your heart when your stomach is full, your house is secure, your career is peaking, and you have absolutely everything you ever wanted?
That's the real test.
We want to leave you with that thought. Have your own seasons of comfort and prosperity subtly become your greatest spiritual hazard. Are you awake to the danger of the milk and honey?
Remaining awake requires active, daily remembrance, a continuous return to the Shema.
Because ultimately, just like the Israelites standing on the edge of the Jordan, you have to remember the grace that saved you, recognize the hidden dangers of the present moment, and decide where your ultimate loyalty lies before you take another step forward. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.